Welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Taylor.
And I'm your co-host, John Mickton. Join us every 2 weeks for conversations with international school leaders, educators, and innovators who are working and engaging in the world of international school education.
And finally, just to say a huge thanks to our valued partner, Thoraya Education Group. We'll jump back in later in the podcast to give you some more information about Thoraya Education Group.
Hello, this is the International Schools Podcast. Your co-host, John Mickton. Nice to have everybody back. Dan Taylor is in Bahrain on business and was just at BET, so he's going to join us at the next one. I want to thank all our listeners. A lot of people are sending comments through LinkedIn and Twitter and just encouraging us to continue this, and also some great feedback, some great suggestions, and really appreciate all the support we're getting kind of unexpectedly for this podcast. So Dan and I are most grateful for that. Today we have two guests, and the first guest, really the person that kind of connected with me after a bit of disconnection, we hadn't been in touch for a little while, is Gregory Hedger, who I've known for the last 20 years. Just before the show, we were saying, God, we've known each other for 2 decades. And in different contexts, Gregory's been a head of school in many international schools around the globe. And we've interacted at conferences and just other situations. And it's always been such a privilege to be connected to Greg as an educator and a school leader. And then we have Max, who's Greg's son, and he's joining us too. And maybe it's a bit of an unorthodox podcast because Greg is an international school leader. Max is an international school student. They are situated in Myanmar, but currently, because of the situation, Greg is at home. It is in Myanmar, and Max is in Minnesota. Correct, Max?
Yes.
Yeah. And now we'd like to say a few words from our valued partner and sponsor, Thoraya Education Group.
Thoraya Education Group has been with you through thick and thin, helping international schools minimize headaches and easing transitions. Whether through paperless admissions with Open Apply, curriculum-first learning with ManageBack, or school-to-home management with Schools Buddy, Thoraya has been your partner.
What's more, Thoraya has been expanding with additional services, including professional development for international school educators. Mini PD is a professional learning platform by practitioners for practitioners. With a global community of learners and coaches, Mini PD makes the learning experience more personal, flexible, and equitable. Looking for a PD solution for your school or something for yourself? Sign up for an individualized coaching and enjoy a 10% discount using the code ISPodcast. Head over to app.minipd.com. That's app.minipd.com to book your personal learning coach today. Mini PD, embracing the learner in every educator. So what we're going to do is Greg and Max are going on this trip together. They're going to canoe down the Mississippi. And we're going to use that journey as a way to kind of learn more about Greg and Max and their adventure and also their lives, and how maybe international school education has been part of that narrative, both being in international schools and some reflections about this fantastic trip that I'm really excited to hear about, because I think that for many people, everybody wants to have that big trip, the trip of the lifetime. And I was very blessed with my wife. We took off 16 months and cycled through Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe. And we actually biked from Saigon to Hanoi in 1989 when there were no cars and it was still very much closed down. And we also cycled through Sumatra and Java. So I really appreciate and empathize the energy, the excitement, and kind of the sense of adventure that something like this brings about such a big project. So we're going to kind of delve into that and learn more. Greg and Max, welcome to International Schools Podcast. Such a wonderful opportunity to have you both here. And I'm just going to throw it back to you, Greg. Maybe kick off with, telling our audience a little about you as a school leader. You've been a director in many different continents. And then we'll go over to Max to tell a bit about his story. So Greg, welcome.
Yeah, well, thanks, John. It is great to connect. It's it's been a long time that we've known each other. Kind of ages us a little bit, I guess, when you think about it. But
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Especially when we start having our kids next to us on, educational podcasts. You're getting
yeah.
older.
Well, and in my case, Max is my youngest, so that's that's really something. But well, let me just tell you a little bit about the trip and how we've gotten to the point of getting ready to do this. And actually, you mentioned that by the time this podcast comes out, we'll actually probably already be on the river at that point. But so here's the thing: I've always enjoyed canoeing and enjoyed the outdoors. And actually, back in 1985, I was working with an organization called the National Youth Leadership Council, and they worked with the United Nations that year on the International Youth Year, and worked to put together. There was two major trips in the world for young people. One was in Russia, and the other was, or the Soviet Union at that time, and the other was on the Mississippi River. And kids came in from all over the world. They do 10 days or a leg of the river, canoeing down it, and they did what's called the Upper Mississippi Navigational Route, so the upper 1,300 miles. And so I was working with the organization that was designing and planning the trip. And so I was actually in charge of putting together all the logistics and the planning and, the routing and all of that. And then as the trip came up, I was then hired to be one of the trip leaders, bringing the kids down the river.
Oh,
so
okay.
I was involved in that 1,300 mile journey. And the thing for me is, I mean, I still look back at that time as really, I think, one of the first true multicultural experiences I had, because in those days anyway, I'll find out if it's still true, but in those days, when you canoe down the Mississippi River, you can't, it's an urban river, right? So you're going through all these little, towns and in some cases cities and a lot of wilderness too, but all these little towns very much had an ethnic flavor from the people who had settled there, and in many cases, same families had been there for generations. And it was an incredibly interesting experience. And I always thought to myself, gee, someday, when I have kids, and I'd like to do this journey again with my kids, and maybe even do the entire river. And then I had three daughters, and none of them were interested in doing something like that, and so I had kind of given up on it. And then Max came into our lives. Max is 15 now, and we adopted him, or we took him into our home when he was 9 years old. He was a street kid here in Myanmar, and we've since adopted him. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But anyway, he's ended up going to camp and to canoe camp every summer in Minnesota, and really has gotten into canoeing. And so then 2 years ago, I actually came across a book here in Myanmar by a guy who had canoed the Irrawaddy River back in, I want to say, the 1930s. And anyway, I picked it up. I found it at an antique bookstore and picked it up and read it, and discovered that that guy, he had canoed basically all the major rivers of the world and had written books about them all. And he had written one about canoeing the Mississippi. And so I got a hold of that, and I got it just as COVID was hitting us, right? And so Max and I ended up being stuck here that first summer of COVID. We couldn't leave. And I had this book, and I was reading it, and I was telling him about it. And finally I said, Max, maybe we should do something like this. And he was all for it. So we actually started planning. We've been planning it for 2 years. And then along the way, there's been a lot happening in Myanmar. And we at some point decided we also wanted to make this really kind of meaningful and take advantage of it as an opportunity to do something for children here in Myanmar. And our school supports a couple of organizations. We're at the International School Yangon, and our school supports a couple of different organizations. One is through United World Schools. We support a small little school up in a village in the mountains up in the northeast of the country. And then we also support an orphanage here in just on the outskirts of Yangon. And so Max and I decided to take advantage of the trip to try and raise funds for those two programs. And so we're taking donations as well. People can
Great.
go to Anyway,
What-
but yes,
Yeah,
go ahead.
no, Greg, go ahead for donations. If people want to go for donations, where would they go?
Well, they can go. So Max and I have a blog, and we've been blogging about things leading up to the trip, and then we're planning to do 2 postings a week as we're traveling. So we encourage people to subscribe to that. But if they go to the blog, there's also a spot where they can donate. And it's let's see,
It's in the
Gregory
show
Hed-
notes. We
Yes,
have it
that's
in
right,
our
right.
show notes. So
Right.
when you go to the podcast and listen, do make a point of going to Greg and Max's blog. And of course, if you feel so inclined to support the organizations there, make sure to make a donation. Now, Greg, I think it's also important to say that you've been a school head in many different countries.
Right.
So you are a school leader, international school leader. Often school leaders don't have much time. They're busy people.
Yeah.
And so you are currently, so you guys are going to carve up a summer? What are you talking, 4 or 5,
Yeah, so
6 weeks?
No, we're talking it's about a 10-week trip. So it's
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, part of the planning process has been getting people on board because we're going to miss a bit of school, so I've had to talk to my board and make sure that they're okay with it, and they're very supportive. The leadership team is going to have to cover for me for a couple of weeks on each end, and so they're taking that on. But it's been interesting because we've made this trip almost a school activity. I mean, we've got, because the 2 organizations that we're raising money for are organizations are school supports, we've also been able to really make our trip something that our community is getting excited about as well. And
That's great. So the community, the school community is actually behind this. So it's kind of more than just Max and Greg's trip. It's the school community's trip, and you're kind of the vehicles, the people that are heading out. Max, when your dad was reading this book and you're stuck in COVID and isolation and everything, were you already interested in those kind of themes of explorers, adventurers, or was it really just somehow by coincidence your dad tapped your shoulder saying, wow, this is a really interesting book?
No, actually I was really interested because I am really like an outdoor person. And I mean, I do love outdoors and stuff, so I was like, it was quite a new thing. And then I didn't even really argue with it. I was like, yeah, I think we should do it.
Awesome. Wow, that's great. And Greg and Max, maybe tell us a bit about how you came together, because I think that in itself is a very interesting story, Greg and Max. So maybe tell us a bit about that chapter and how from there now you're going on this trip, you're part of the same family. Maybe give us a little background to how this all started.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that, Max?
Max, do you want to start?
Sure. All right. How do we start it, right? Is that the question?
Well,
yeah,
he's
more
wanting
how
to
did you
understand
connect to your
how we met. He wants to understand
yeah,
how
exactly. Kind
I
of, because
think-
it's a bit of an unusual story. So I think our
Yeah.
listeners would love to hear the story.
Yeah. I think in 2016, I was still little. I couldn't speak any English. I think all I know is like hello. And there was one time that Dad, he was walking with his daughter Anna and Joey, and I crossed by, and then actually I crossed by. I think I asked for money that day, and they were very kind of it, and they gave me some money, and I didn't think I'll see them again, because people always, you see them is all gone, right? So I saw them first day, and I think every week or so, or every like Friday, I see them again. And then same again, I asked for money, and over time it got a little more, it just I don't know how to say it, but it's like over time they will come, and then there's time he won't come, but just because he went to different school, like different place for his work. And then there's time I'd be like wondering why he's not coming, and then there's times like, maybe he have work, but I couldn't understand anything, so it was hard for me. Um, that
Yeah,
was really, yeah. Go ahead.
can I jump in there and fill in some
Yeah.
pieces that
Yeah.
so because yeah I
Thank
think
you,
John,
Max.
No problem.
John, I think you're probably maybe a little more familiar with Max's background, but of course, people listening probably aren't. Uh, and so Max's situation is he was living on the streets here in Yangon. He's actually from a little village that's about 10 hours north of here. But when Max was quite young, his father had passed away, and his mother couldn't take care of him and had sent him, as well as he has some other brothers as well. And they'd all been sent to different places to work. So Max was sent to Yangon here, and he worked in a tea shop, and then eventually ran away from there and was living on the streets. And when that's where we met him, he was 9 at the time, and he ended up. As he was talking, as he was mentioning there, so we would see him. He was living for the most part under a bridge, not too far from our home, and we would go running down there, go walking or whatever, and see him, and we'd give him money, and then occasionally he would also come back to the house, and we'd give him a meal and some clothes and stuff. And then at one point, he just kind of disappeared, and we didn't know where he had gone to. And so I had our head of security come down to that area and ask around. And we discovered that that one of the other kids down there had pickpocketed somebody, and the police didn't know which one of the kids did it. And so they just rounded them all up. And so we ended up going down to the police station and got them to release Max to me. And so then I brought him home. And at that point, my youngest daughter was still living with us at the time, and she and my wife and I, we kind of thought that maybe Max would, we assumed he would still live on the streets, but that he could just use our home as a home base. But instead, he never left, and so.
The food was too good.
Yeah, and so then we decided to try and help him find his family, and it was interesting because we used Google Earth, and he was able to go on Google Earth with us and show us exactly where his village is and his home is. And so then our head of security went there and found his mom, and she actually had thought he had died because he'd been on the streets for about 1.5 years at that point, so she had no contact with him. And so she was very happy to find out that he was alive, but she was also saying, if he's got some place to live, she'd rather he stay there because she didn't have the ability to take care of him. And so then he was with us, and then just gradually over time, we kind of fell in love with him and decided that we wanted to try to adopt him, which that in and of itself was quite an adventure.
I'm sure,
because there's no adoption treaty between Myanmar and the U.S. That ended up being a very long and challenging process that we eventually worked through. And then as a result, we also got him going in our school, and
excellent.
He picked up English very fast, and the U.S.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the English is amazing, Max.
Yeah.
Well done, really.
Thank you.
It's so impressive. Yeah.
And
What
so
a
he's doing
story.
good.
Just an amazing story. And what a nice way to now go on this adventure as a way to spend time together. I'm sure there's just going to be a lot of evenings sitting around the fire, reflecting, and also the hours of paddling and all the different things that you're going to encounter. Max, when you think about this trip, and your dad, before we were recording, was telling me that you go to camp in Minnesota and you do some canoeing. So canoeing is not like an unknown quantity for you,
No.
but it's something that you've really enjoyed and you like doing. What are kind of the things that are exciting you about this adventure? Because this is quite significant. It's just not any river. It's one of the great rivers, and there's literature and stories and history. There's so much embedded in this fantastic geographic location and the river. What are you kind of excited about?
Well, I am really excited for lots of things, but main thing is really just going down the river, going on a different campsite. There'll be some on campsite, there'll be some on boathouse, there'll be some on hotel. So it'll be depending on the days and time, right? I think that'll be fun because a lot of time you go camping, you really go camping on the ground, right?
Yeah.
I haven't really done on a boat house or something like that. And that's new.
Nice.
And I think I'm kind of looking for that too. Also, just kind of really want to see how this go. I mean,
Yeah. And have you, so you go to Minnesota, which is your home, and have you traveled in other parts of the United States, or will this be your first really opportunity to discover some other states?
I have traveled to other state. This year is probably the first one because we had a lots of times this year. We took a 10-day trip to, where did we go then again?
We went out to Washington State and went through Glacier Park and all that.
Oh,
We
nice.
drove out to Washington State. Yeah.
But it's the first year that I went to different states. Usually I'm
Okay.
in Minnesota.
Yeah, yeah. And you're in 8th grade, correct? At
Yes.
the International School of Yangon. And so you also get to have a bit of a special treatment, 2 weeks on each end of no school. Is that the same as your dad? Yeah. Okay.
It might be
And you're
close.
okay. And you're going into 9th grade next year, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And so when you talk to your friends, at break time and lunch, or when you guys are hanging out on the weekends, what are people saying? They're like, what? Or they're like, no. I mean, what's kind of the atmosphere when you tell your friends?
I think it's mostly yes, very exciting, but same time, I don't think they kind of fully understand what we're actually doing. But I think they know what part of it. I mean, some people do, but lots of people don't really understand what's this for.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things to understand, John, is Max is not at ISY this year. So he and my wife went home after the political situation last spring, and then actually I was even back in Minnesota at the beginning of the school year. We couldn't get back into the country, and so we put Max in a public school in Duluth, Minnesota, and and then we decided to let him finish the year there. So it's actually been so he's not yes, he's been at ISY before this year, and he'll be back there again in August. But for this school year, he's actually going to school in Minnesota.
Okay, and you, Greg, the school is still open and functioning, but as I understand it, a much smaller scale than pre-revolution, pre-demonstrations, or whatever the title is for the event. And so you're still physically there, and you have a skeleton staff still there, and kids.
Correct.
What kids are there?
So it's interesting. So back when when things were normal, and we had slightly over 800 kids at that time, and we had a nationality cap, and no one nationality could be more than 30% of the school.
Interesting.
But then, of course, when everybody left, it was the majority of the foreigners who left, and so that 30% of kids who were Myanmar kids before now represent probably more like 70 or 80% of the school. So it's largely a Myanmar population that's there right now. Now we're hoping that things will change. So we actually just got back and reopened in person the beginning of February.
Congratulations!
And the airport here is actually just reopening in April. So we had to come in on a chartered flight when we came back. And so we're hoping that things will start to turn around. It's a tough situation because the military regime is still very much in power here, and so it's. It's a challenging situation. I'm not sure how quickly foreigners will come back, if they do come back, but we are hoping that at least, we may never see 800 again, but we're hoping that we'll at least increase a bit.
Yeah, and Greg, you were in Venezuela also at a very interesting time, correct?
Yeah. So I was there. So I've been here for 6 years, and right before this, I was at ECA in Venezuela. So I was there as Chavez passed away and Maduro came to power, and then of course into that period is when a lot of the demonstrations got very thick and very heavy there. And similarly, I saw the enrollment drop there as well. When I got there, it was at about 700, and by the time I left, it was at about 300. So,
Wow.
yeah, and yeah, I'm
That's almost a whole other podcast, I think. And I don't want to spend too much time on that topic because we want to talk about the river trip. So
Right.
tell me a bit about what are you doing to prepare? I mean, you're 10 weeks. I assume it's going to be a few hundred miles of river paddling, maybe even 1,000. I don't know. I don't know how many miles you paddle a day or kilometers.
Well, it's the total trip is between 2,300 and 2,400 miles, depending on which route you take at the very end, because of course there's the delta at the end, right? So it's but it's over 2,000 miles, and our goal, we've set a goal for ourselves of trying to do about 30 miles a day, which seems like it should be pretty reasonable. Up in the upper part of the river, that we might be pushing it to do that if the water level's low. We're not, we don't know what it's going to be like. But we're starting early enough. We're starting the last week of May, and so we're hoping that the river level will be high enough that it won't slow us down too much. But then,
and tell us a bit about the water level. Why is that important?
Well, because if so, of course, the Mississippi, most people know the Mississippi is this big, wide, giant river, but actually up where it starts, it's actually a tiny little stream. And so if the water level is too low, I mean, you'll end up having to pick up all your stuff and walk for a while.
I see. Okay.
And
okay.
That can go on.
So you're starting right at the source.
Yes. Yep. At Lake Itasca. Yeah.
And so Max, are you on a rowing machine every morning doing X amount of miles, or how are you physically getting ready for this?
Actually, I haven't done that. But I haven't thought of that part yet, being honest. But I'm sure I can do it. I think the few days might be hard, but I think I'll get into the routine once we actually start.
Yeah. And the canoe that is it a traditional American or Native American canoe kind of design, or is it specially designed for this kind of long trip? I mean, are there some, design aspects that you have to take into consideration for doing a trip with a canoe like this?
So the canoe we have is actually, it's a North Star canoe, which is a company in Minnesota, and they make, I don't want to say that they're handmade, but they make them right there at a small place in Minnesota. And so we chatted with them when we started to talk about the trip. We talked to them because they have several different models, and about which model would be the best for us. And so we have what's called the Northwind 17-footer. So it's a 17-foot canoe, which is a normal size canoe. When you see the Alumacraft canoes or whatever, that's what they are. This canoe it's exceptionally lightweight. So that's good if we have to do any of that carrying. And it's also is a bit wider than normal canoes, which is good for carrying gear and so forth. But so it should be. But the other part of that's good is the lightweightness will allow us to move a bit faster than we would with some other canoes.
Okay. And so you guys, I assume you're taking equipment and clothes and gear and everything, and basic supplies, but will you basically be buying food and beverages along the way, or are there sections where you might be paddling for 2-3 days and there might not be any places to find food and drink?
Yeah. So we've got. I mean, some of this is coming from my memory, and some of it is from reading. But the Mississippi is kind of an interesting river because it's so long that it has some very distinct features in different places. So almost the first third of the river is in Minnesota. When I say the third of the traveling will be in Minnesota, and starting up at Lake Itasca, you're going through a lot of wilderness areas, natural parks, state parks and national parks. So a lot of outdoors area. And so yes, you can go for good lengths of time without seeing a town. And then you start getting down towards Minneapolis, and really from probably just north of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, really almost until you get down to St. Louis, it becomes a very urban river with a lot of towns, small towns, and cities. And that's where I've told Max that once in a while we might be able to stop and stay in a motel or a hotel along the way in that section. And then after St. Louis, it becomes an incredibly commercial river. And also as you're getting closer down to getting farther down towards New Orleans, there historically has been problems with flooding, right? So a lot of the places along the river, there's dikes built that cities or towns are not on the river. They're built way back from the river, and so suddenly it becomes almost like a wilderness river again, a wilderness river with commercial, like large barge traffic. And so it's, so anyway, so there'll be one section, really that midsection where, we'll have lots of access to restocking, but then there'll be periods where we won't be able to restock. But we're kind of planning it that basically about every 10 days we'll be looking to restock our food. Yeah.
So you will take enough stuff for 10 days. That's kind of the idea.
Right.
And that's all carried on the canoe. And I assume you have dry packs, etc. I mean, does one tip over with a canoe? I've been on a canoe. I'm from Switzerland. We have, I don't even know if they call them canoes, but on Lake Le Mans or Lake Geneva, as many people know. You tip over and thing. Is that something that you have to prepare for? Is like you're wearing life vests, you have dry packs, all those things are taken into consideration?
Yeah, Max, you've done some canoe camping.
I done some drills, like the tipping stuff and how you can handle out, but I done it with a group which has like 3 canoe, so you can get your boat out of the water, because once you tip, it's hard to get out by yourself. You just can't do it, because if you tip it, like if you push it other way, because we have a very, I think like 3.5 feet wide, so it's hard to put it back to really flat on the water. But I don't know how we're going to not really, if you tip it, I think it's going to be hard to get the boat up, but I think we can manage to get the bags.
Yeah, but the short of it, John, is that the goal is to not tip. And
yes, of course.
I can do that.
So, but we will be prepared for it. I mean, life vests. We have some very comfortable life vests because we will be wearing them all the time. And then we've got a couple of what are called Duluth packs, which are very large packs that sit in the canoe, so you store your things in it. But inside, those are canvas packs, and inside those Duluth packs, you have things in dry bags or in plastic bags or whatever. And then you will be tying those Duluth packs into the canoe so that we don't lose those if we do tip. But hopefully, hopefully that won't happen.
Well, I'm thinking it's so wide that it seems like it's a canoe that has a lot of stability. And I take it the Mississippi River is a pretty calm river. I mean, apart from the currents, it's not like a lake or an ocean in the sense that it's pretty...
one of the challenges with Mississippi is that it's got a lot of dams and locks and dams on it, right? And so behind the locks, there's oftentimes very large what have become lakes. And so there are spots where and the river itself is a very once you get down well, really start getting down to Minneapolis, St. Paul, the river is actually a very, very wide river. And so it does, yeah, you can get some pretty strong winds. And so we have to, watch out for that. And then, of course, I mean, as you start getting farther down the river, there's oftentimes hurricanes, as we know, down in the New Orleans area.
Yeah.
And that can create some very, very strong weather farther up the river. And then of course, just normal summer weather. So it is something that we have to be prepared for. At the same time, we're going to, we don't plan to be traveling in the middle of the river too often. So
yeah, exactly. Max, as you're doing this trip, are you keeping a journal? Are you taking pictures? Are you going to have an Instagram feed? What are the kind of, how are you trying to record this adventure for yourself and your friends?
I thought of making an Instagram, just a fresh new Instagram, and but really not really a job, but what I want to do is really film for school and for
cool.
this is what I planned is for film for a school website, which is the blog that we post, or film for my social media stuff, which is the Instagram I just talked about.
Great. And you're just using that with a smartphone, or you're going to have an actual film camera?
I think I might do both, just like a GoPro, just because once it's windy or like it raining, like I don't have to take my phone out because the camera is already waterproof. Yeah, it's just much easier, a little lighter. I mean, another thing, you can put it in your head, on your vest, really anywhere. So I think probably both.
It gives you a lot of flexibility with the GoPro, and that's always nice to kind of see as you're moving forward. That image, that footage is excellent. So Greg and Max, do you spend X amount of hours a week kind of planning, discussing? Is there like a routine that you're getting into, or are you just going to show up the first day and go? What are you doing to kind of prepare yourselves, both mentally and just as two individuals that are going to spend a lot of time together in this adventure?
Yeah, I'm bringing earplugs, so no, I'm just kidding. No, we kind of go through periods where we do a lot of talking about it, and then periods where we're not talking a lot about it. Certainly, when I was back in Minnesota in the summer and in the fall, we were doing a lot more talking. We've got, for example, in the basement of our house, we've got a closet where we're constantly adding things to it. Anything we think we might want to bring on the trip, we're just tossing in there at the moment. And then as soon as I get back, then we'll be packing up.
So the trip that you're doing is you're going down the Mississippi. Are there different routes? I mean, obviously, I assume you're not the only one doing this, and a lot of people do it with sailboats or motorboats or barges or whatever. Yeah. Is there like a community or a group, is a Facebook group, or is there somewhere you can reach out and say, hey, you've done it, what are some tips, what are some cautions, what are some excitements?
Yeah, so there are a couple of Mississippi River Facebook sites, so we're on those, and we've gotten some information from them. There's also a group of people called the River Angels, who are people who live up and down the river, and they have a Facebook site as well. And so, for example, if restocking of food, you can reach out to them a couple of days before you're going to be at a site and find somebody who might be willing to pick up your groceries for you and then bring it to you and meet you. Or some of them who live along the river, if they know you're coming, they'll you can camp out in their yard and they'll have a barbecue for you or whatever. So there's there's those kind of people who are there as well. Mississippi's a recreational river in addition to being a commercial river. There's a lot of people doing recreational things. There's a lot of people canoeing segments of the river. The number of people doing the full river like we're going to do it is probably between 10 and 20 people a year. So it's so it's not a large group, but it is a group that does it. And some of them have websites where they've written about their trips, so we've been able to go on there and get information as well. And
So this sounds like there are a lot of points of reference that you can kind of tap into. So Max, when you think about this, what are some feelings that you have? You know, this is your what, we're now in March, early April. You have a few months. What are kind of the feelings? Are you excited? Is there any trepidation?
I am excited, but I think there's two things I don't think I'm excited. Is one, once we get down, the big ships. I think it kind of scares me because I watch some YouTube, and the canoe is like this big, and the ship is like it's huge, and I think the one that's I'm really scared of that part.
Okay.
Another thing
Okay.
is alligator.
Oh, good point.
The alligator. It's yeah, that thing scares me because once you get down, you'll see more of those guys.
Down when you go down to the Mississippi Delta, kind of
Yeah.
New Orleans area. Yeah, yeah.
So
Oh, you know, that's interesting that you say the alligator. I never thought of wildlife. You know, I had lived in Africa, and when we were in Tanzania, whenever you got out of your Land Rover, they always said, "Now you're part of the food chain." You know, everything is equal. So I absolutely can empathize the feeling of, you know, when wild animals like alligators, you know, that makes it more complicated. Greg, how about you? What are some of the feelings and excitements and maybe even trepidations you have about doing this?
Well, I'm actually, I'm most excited about spending the time with Max. I'm looking forward to that. And, you know, especially because this year we haven't had a lot of time together. So so I'm looking forward to that. You know, one of the things I'm more nervous about is, you know, last time I canoed this river, I was 20, 23, 24, something like that. I'm turning 60 this year. So my body's in a bit different shape than it was at that time. So I'm, not looking forward to the aches and pains that I anticipate will be there for the first couple of weeks. Yeah, but it's, I mean, I have to say, generally speaking, I'm very excited about it and looking forward to it.
Is there something, if, you know, we think many of our listeners have children, young adolescents, and, you know, a shared experience with a parent or a sibling is always a very rich component of you know, life's journey and life's experiences. Did you have to do much convincing? Or did you, maybe your wife was like, no, you're not doing that. That's a crazy idea. I mean, how did you guys kind of, I mean, you had that experience of having done the Mississippi and being involved with that organization. But when you start bringing up the idea, what were some, you know, strategies that you came up with to see, you know, how am I going to sell this that it becomes palatable to everybody involved? Yeah, and of course your daughters and your larger family.
You know, everybody's been very supportive. I mean, my wife, she knows that, you know, I like, yeah, you know, what I guess one of the things that, you know, is when I think about it, you know, it's like I'm somebody who just loves life, and I like adventure. I like doing exciting things. Thus, the reason we live in the places we do, right? And and yeah, my wife knows that, and you know, when I broached it with her, she was very supportive. The girls, I mean, they live very adventurous lives themselves, and so they've been very supportive, and you know, it's yeah. I mean, I don't think we've. There might be some people who think we're crazy, but not saying it to our faces. I don't know, but certainly everybody that we've talked to has been very supportive. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And Max, do you ever think, oh, maybe this is not a good idea? Do you ever have second thoughts?
I have, but I have it, and I went back to normal. But yeah,
And why
but
did you
yeah,
have
we
a
should do
second
it.
thought? What was the thing that gave you a second thought?
The ships. Once I saw the ships.
Yeah,
Because once you get down there, it's really long, it's really wide, and the weather can change in about a minute, right? Okay, it's so big that it can change, you know, it can get rough very easily. Especially think of a ship passing by, there's a big wave coming at you, and you're going to try to go next to the shore. I think it'll be challenging for that part. But
yeah, I can only imagine, because those ships, actually, when you think of them, they're huge oil tankers. I mean, the size, you know, I think you know, your dad was actually alluding to that. People forget the Mississippi is a very wide, busy river. And I like the way you were mentioning that, Greg, that it's a commercial river, it's a recreational river, it's also a natural wildlife river. So it has many different characteristics and different personalities. And I think, Max, you talking about the ships is a great way to highlight that commercial component of it. So right now, you are both in two separate countries. What are you taking a few weeks before to get ready, or is it literally you're going to, you know, have a weekend, pack and go, or is there some preparation to do before actually getting on the boats?
Well, we're doing a lot of the preparation now. My wife is actually helping out with that. And then when I fly home, I'll fly home about a week before we hit the river. And so that'll give us some time to get packed up. But yeah, my wife is actually helping out, getting some things organized, getting some things purchased for us. We're, of course, you know, these days you can do a lot of stuff online. So we're doing some work online. But yeah, once I get back, there'll be about a week before we hit the river.
And will you have somebody tracking you, somebody driving along the coastline in a car? No. So you're just doing it.
We don't have that, but on our blog, we're posting kind of the itinerary, like roughly where we'll be. And we've, we're inviting people to join us. I mean, I grew up in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, and actually all three of my daughters live there. And so, you know, we anticipate seeing them there. My wife's family is down in St. Louis, so we anticipate seeing some people there. And then, you know, there's a few other friends and people we know who have indicated they want to, you know, hook up with us at different spots. So there'll be opportunities to see people, but no, nobody's going to be traveling alongside of us now.
Okay. And I assume when you are on this river, you try to stay close to the shore as much as possible. Is there like a distance, or, you know, is there some guidance on how to, you know, when you're on a big river like that?
Well,
what's the best way?
So there's a navigational route on the river, which is marked out by buoys, by colored buoys, and the commercial traffic has to stay within the navigational route. So that's the goal, is to stay out of that. And but as I mentioned, in some places the river is quite wide, and so the navigational route takes up a very small portion of it. But and then in some places the area close to shore is very shallow, so we want to avoid that as well. So it'll be different in different places. Yeah.
So you really have to accommodate for the different geographic and kind of shoreline.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Max, I assume you've been doing a lot of canoeing. What is the secret to somebody that does good canoeing? What is there a pace? Is it the way you paddle? Are there just things that work better than others? Just curious.
Well, I think, teamwork is one of them. Teamwork. Yeah. And just having a good steering is probably the best part.
And you're steering with a paddle, correct? You don't have a little rudder.
No, you go left to right with your hands, I guess.
Okay. And what about like blisters and things like that? Do you wear gloves?
I think we will bring gloves. I'm sure you're going to get blister because you're going to put 30 miles per day or more. So I think you'll get some of that. Also, just from the heat too, like the sun and stuff.
Yeah. And are you sitting down on a little, like a stool, or are you on your knees? What's the best position when you're in a canoe?
I mean, you just want to try to stable as possible. So you're sitting just like a chair, but you're a little lower.
Okay.
And then we bought some of this little chair for canoe, which is just like for your back. You have a little rest for back. So it's better for long distance, like 30 miles. Just like a little stool that like a fold in a half stool. Just sit on it and then you just paddle. You want to stay balanced, so you just sit balanced as possible.
And then the teamwork is talking to each other and going into a rhythm. So one person on the right, one person on the left. A lot of communication between both people.
Yes.
Yeah. And who gets to sit up front and in the back, or does it rotate?
I probably rotate either way. because I can
Cool.
steer, and then Dad
Yeah,
can
yeah,
steer.
we're both capable of doing it. So, yeah.
So here you are, you're about to go on this trip. What I would like to do is this time next year, how about we have a podcast and we can
That
hear
would be
about the
fantastic.
adventure. And we just want to remind to our listeners, check out the show notes. Greg and Max have a blog there. And of course, if you're interested, subscribe to it and you can follow them as they do this adventure. And of course, please remember 2 organizations in Myanmar. So really trying to raise some awareness, and the school community, the International School of Yangon, is also supporting them. Any final thoughts or anything you think people should understand when you go about doing something as a father-son? Is there just any advice or some words of wisdom you both have?
Max, anything from you?
Right now I can't think of it. You can go ahead then.
Well, I mean, the only thing I can say is, I think once you decide, once you're interested in doing something, you just have to kind of commit to it and see it through. And, once we decided we wanted to do it, we've plowed forward and have been planning. There's been any possible little obstacle around the possibility of doing it, we've worked through that. And yeah, it's I guess it's making the commitment and going for it.
Yeah,
Take risks.
and I bet Max, 3 years ago, you never imagined you were going to be paddling down the Mississippi.
No, never thought of that part.
And just as we wrap up, you're in a public school in Duluth, or
Yep.
in
Ordean East.
and I assume for many of your cohorts, this is very unusual, or is this something on canoeing?
It's very unusual to do the whole Mississippi River. Even I think people have done it, but it's just short amount.
And your friends, are they excited? Do they want to support you? I mean, are they subscribing to your blog?
Well, I think 5 of my teachers are. Because
great.
I gave them information, and then they share to other teacher. Our teacher have connection.
Yeah.
So teacher are kind of following or with our journey, I hope.
Great. Excellent.
I think even some of my family, not my family, some of my friends' family members are keeping up too.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Well, this is just wonderful. And thank you, Greg and Max, for coming on the International Schools podcast. Just fascinating to hear your story, how you connected here in Myanmar, and then this adventure, your connection to when you were actually with that association, and how this now you're sharing that rich adventure with your son, Max. So we wish you a wonderful trip. All the best. I'm subscribing to your blog, and I know what I'll be reading this summer is The Adventures of Max and Greg on the Mississippi, which just sounds outstanding. We really wish you all the best, and we have a date next March here on the International School podcast, and we can kind of hear about your adventure and how the big ships did, Max, and if you saw any alligators. Those are the 2 things I'm going to be asking you about. Well, listen, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and really wish you all the well and good health and a very positive adventure. Thank you.